Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Dutch and myself, Roland, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing. And today we have a very special guest, all the way from a garage basement band type setup that you've got there, Jennifer Lewy, who is a freelance and fictional author, deeply invested in the future of where AI and writing intersect. And you have the most professional mic setup of all of us. Are you going to whip out a guitar and start playing some thrash metal for us?
I wish I could. It's a delight to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, we are very, very happy to have you here. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Dutch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing great. Thanks, Roland. Welcome, Jen. We're going to talk about AI and writing and all that stuff, which is a topic that I never tire of. And we have covered it a couple times, but there's always more to go into. And with AI, stuff changes like weekly, daily sometimes. So covering it over and over again, it's going to keep it fresh because it's constantly evolving. And when we started talking about this a year ago, when it all sort of burst onto the scene, I think authors were more reticent about the idea of using AI for writing. There's still some fear out there of it taking jobs. It's taking lots of people's jobs right now. But as I've said in the past, and I still maintain, I think that there is a place for AI as a tool to help writers and to make your job easier and to just assist you in your endeavors. It doesn't have to be a replacement, right? So let's talk to you about what you're doing with AI. Give us some background of you and yourself and how you sort of came upon AI, and then let's figure out what you're doing and get into it.
So of interest to your listeners, I started out as a marketing writer, and I opened my own freelance marketing writing business, and over time started specializing in working with technology companies. So for a few years before AI came into the public consciousness, I was working with companies that were using AI in their healthcare applications, and I was seeing AI being this real robust support to providers, to healthcare professionals in helping them make diagnostic decisions and coming up with better treatment plans, in helping to analyze large amounts of data to support them in being better healthcare providers and to better connect with their patients and provide better care. So that's the mindset that I came into fiction writing with. And I always knew that I wanted to write a book, and it was always a someday project. And I know many of us can relate to this. When the pandemic hit, I thought, well, this is my opportunity to try this idea that I had running around in my brain. So I sat down and I opened my document and I was going to write my book. And as we all know, it doesn't quite work that way. So I invested in some courses and some coaching. I had a wonderful outline strategy that I had sort of put together from different resources, and I still struggled. And I understand now, having gone through Becca Syme's process of learning what your strengths are from the Clifton Strengths program. I'm very high in intellection, in strategy, in futuristic thinking, and that boils down to me getting very quickly into my head and into sort of this overthinking and paralysis framework when I'm trying to produce fiction, when I'm trying to produce words. So that's when I heard a podcast interview on the Creative Pen podcast with the founders of Sudowrite. And I thought, oh, this is a tool just like, the healthcare providers that I'm writing for every day use, that might be able to help me and keep me focused in what it is that I want to be doing, which is to be writing this book and writing this series. So I tested the beta version of that software, and that was in 2021. And this is still well before ChatGPT came on the scene. And I was blown away. And I started, this is a very early version of the AI, and it's even better now. But what I would do is, in my process, I would have this idea. I knew that the scene I was working on, I knew the characters, and I knew what was going to be happening, but I just got to a point and I froze. What's going to happen now? And I would get into that thinking mode. Are they going to stand up? Is this person going to come in? Is the, thing going to explode now? And I would just freeze. But I could turn to Sudowrite and I could paste in a little bit about what I was working on and have it suggest some ways, some direction, some language, some ideas. And I would be like, brilliant. Okay, that's it. I'm going to take this little idea. I'm going to use this concept. I'm going to use that phrase, and I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to continue writing. So AI never has been and is still not able to write a book or even write a chapter or a scene, but it was a partner that I could iterate with in the moment, stay in the action of writing instead of pausing to think and interrupting that process. So that's the long answer to how I started writing with AI.
Yeah, I mean that's what I think is one of the biggest strengths still, and this is 2021, which, I mean, you know, and nobody had really heard of ChatGPT back then, right? That's sort of still the way that I think of how authors should be using it, as a tool, as a brainstorming tool mainly. For me, it's like gets you unstuck. It comes up with ideas. It doesn't have to. A lot of people are like, oh, it doesn't have you know, unique ideas and this and that. But it's not about that, because you're not, like you said, you're not using it to write. You're using it to brainstorm and come up with ideas that your brain wouldn't have connected with, your brain wouldn't have come up with. And it's like when you are brainstorming with a bunch of people and they're all throwing out ideas, and some are bad and some are good, but they get you thinking about something where you weren't on that wavelength, and now you are, and then you can run with it, right? So it's not like, you know, you needed it to give you all the answers. It pushed you in a direction you hadn't gotten yet, but once you get there, then you take over.
And to give you some specific examples, because it's hard when you're just thinking about this theoretically, like, you know, yeah. And sometimes when you're brainstorming with a person, it can be very helpful. But when you're brainstorming with an AI, you are just tapping into a unlimited, infinite, you know, intelligence. So, and it's generative. So that means it's not just reiterating things that it's learned. It's trying to anticipate what the sequence is, or what the most logical outcome is of what you're asking. And so, to give an example, a couple of examples, there were some settings that I was developing in my novel, which is a post-apocalyptic, takes place about 150 or so years in the future. So I was coming up with some very, you know, fictional settings. What would a futuristic healing center look like? And I had an idea in my mind, and I would get to the part in the scene I was writing where I knew that I could spend time thinking about how I wanted this healing center to look and feel. And some writers will just put at that point in brackets, describe healing center, and we'll move on with the scene. But my brain doesn't work that way. So I need to know, what is this healing center like, so I can have the characters in this scene interacting with this setting in a realistic feeling way. And I just couldn't continue until I had that sense. So I would turn to Sudowrite at the time, and I would say, just let's expand on this idea of this futuristic healing center. Explain to me what you think that might look like. And the AI would come back with how it might smell, how it might look, and what people might be doing there, what different jobs there might be, what they might be wearing, how you might progress through. And this is not just one output. This is me asking again and again and using different ways to interact and get more information out. And I was able to piece together through different things that the AI came out with what this setting looked like. And I created that setting. I had the idea in my mind, but these little pieces of little sparks of different things came together for me so I could fully visualize that and move on with the scene. And another way that the AI helps a lot, and is even better now in a different tool that I'm using called Novelcrafter, is the AI can rewrite dialogue and suggest different character traits, and can weave in different ideas of how your world is going to be interacting. So another example is I'm writing characters that are very brilliant coders and game designers. And I'm personally not a techie, so I don't know the language. And again, this is taking place very far in the future, so it's very loosely connected to anything in reality anyway. But I really wanted some ideas about how would futuristic tech people, teens, be talking, and what kind of jargon would they be using. So that's another way that I iterated with the AI to help me come up with phrases and slang and different names for different programs, or even just the act of programming. We probably don't call it programming in the future. What would that be? So, and again, that's something I could have sat and researched and brainstormed myself and gone through Google searches and just made up myself. But the process of working with the AI is so joyful and so fun and so playful that it's just so mind opening, and it's a process that I enjoy so much.
Yeah, I think it helps speed things along. I think your brain and my brain work a lot alike in that those kind of things would get me stuck sometimes too. It's I sometimes overthink, and I'm the kind of person who, even though you're supposed to just dump out that first paragraph and not self-edit as you go, I'm always like rewriting. So it's, if I get stuck on something, then I'll like iterate over it. So it's like, even if you're not going to use what it takes, it's good to get something in there, and better than nothing than that placeholder. But I think that what you mentioned is something to touch on, just for people that really aren't familiar with AI yet. The idea that it's not about just putting in a prompt, which is what people call the instruction you give to the AI, the question, the way you phrase your question to the AI, right? So you might say, give me a description of a futuristic health center. But the more detailed you are in your prompt, the more detailed and specific your response will be. So if you said just that, it would be more generic. But if you said, in my futuristic world set 150 years in the future, where this is happening and this is happening, there's a health center and it needs to do this and it needs to, and then the prompt would give you a much more in-depth answer that would be specific to your thing. But what I want people to understand, if they haven't used it, is it's not like, oh, then you just take that answer, you have to take that answer or whatever. You can have a conversation with the AI to drill in and get more information, just like you would if you were talking to an expert or something and they describe something to you. You'd say, oh, tell me more about the weird chairs that you mentioned that connect right to their brain or whatever. And it'll be, and then it'll give you all that information and give me more information about this. And it remembers the context of your conversation. You don't have to repeat all the bit like we used to do a search. You search for something and then it doesn't give you what you want, so you have to do a new search using those terms plus a few other terms. You don't have to do that. You can have a conversation. It remembers the context, and that's one of the beauties of it. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to get it right in that first prompt. You can keep iterating, and even over days, and keep coming back to that same conversation and where you left off, and continue drilling in until you get what you want.
And you're describing very accurately the experience of chatting with a chatbot like ChatGPT or like Claude. And the tools that I'm working with and that some authors are starting to work with take that even a step further. There's actually in Sudowrite, and I've paused using Sudowrite because I'm trying out even a new and I think more advanced tool called Novelcrafter. But in Sudowrite, there is no chat even. What it does is it's an interface that uses your story Bible, so you can input your outline, your genre, some of your characters and settings, and it will use that as context to, if you are creating in its window, for example, and you say, continue writing, and you can specify how creative you'd like it to be and how many words you'd like it to output. It will look at your story Bible, it will look at what's already been generated for your text, and it will make a prediction of how the next few lines should go. So that can be very helpful in just keeping the writing going. You can also guide the writing a little bit, saying, well, I want this person to have a fight with this person, and I want it to be very emotional, and you can see what it comes up with. And again, it's not great at right now. It's something that will give you ideas and keep you writing so that you can keep that momentum going. But what Novelcrafter does is even a step beyond that. So this is a tool that also is an interface, and both of these tools are not free. You pay a monthly fee or you pay for a year subscription to them, and you have an interface that you use. And in Novelcrafter, the codex, what they call the codex, is very detailed. So you can put in all kinds of information about the story or the world that you're writing in, from settings and characters, but also your writing style, important objects and groups, brainstorming timelines, brain dumps of what's going to happen in the past or in the future, before and after your story. It's just very, very detailed. And within the writing feature, supposedly, and I'm saying supposedly because I haven't used it that much yet, is every time you're generating content, the system is pulling from that codex and pulling from very specific characters or things that you want to have happen or things that you want it to take into account as it's generating. So we're getting better, and I think the developers of these programs are hoping that we're progressing towards a future where people who have an idea for a story can sit down, put in some details about the story, and very easily construct a narrative. But as we said, we're not there yet. So these tools are getting more robust and getting very exciting and fun to work with, but they are not writing stories.
That's really interesting. And how long have you been using these?
So I started working with Sudowrite in 2021. I published my first book in 2022, just a month before ChatGPT was released. And then these tools really started getting this better engine behind them. I used Sudowrite again for my second book. And then in about a year or so ago, Novelcrafter was released, and I've now using that to write my third book.
Interesting. That is, I mean, to me, it seems like this is what Craig is way ahead of it, because Craig's like bought into this. But to me, I'm just like, because I use ChatGPT, I use it to come up with headlines and stuff like that. But I still, I'm deeply skeptical about this. But the more I hear it, so how you've written complete books using, say, Sudowrite?
Yes, and when I say I've written complete books with Sudowrite, that is with Sudowrite as my co-pilot or my co-creator, and in a way that is very much iterative. I have the idea, I will turn to it for inspiration, extra words, different ideas of how things could go, and I will take that information and put it back into my document. So I'm writing my book, and I'm using Sudowrite and Novelcrafter as a co-inspiration person thing.
Like a writing assistant almost, right?
It's a writing assistant, brainstorming assistant, research assistant, editor, book coach rolled into one.
That's
yeah,
amazing.
I haven't even tried those tools yet because I'm not really like writing a book at the moment. So you're right. Most of my experience is with the chatbot, ChatGPT, or some of the ones that I've installed in my own environment. But I know I have talked to a lot of people that are sort of using those tools, and they all swear by them. And the idea that, like you're talking about, because one of the problems early on was the idea of how much context that these things can keep in their sort of brain at the same time, right? So you would have it helping you write, but then as you get deeper into it, it's forgetting all the stuff it did before, right? But I think that Novelcrafter you had mentioned has a much bigger context window, and to be able to keep all that codex stuff, I imagine it's either rereading it all the time or it just has a bigger memory for that sort of thing.
You're right. That's a good way to think about it. And I'm, again, not a tech person. And there are many features of Novelcrafter that I will never understand or use. But I do know that the codex is immense, and you don't want it to pull in that every single time you're writing one thing or want to chat about one thing. So I think you can direct the AI to pull in this particular group of characters or this particular thing, so that you're not using so much in your context window every single time. So it's very targeted, but the potential is there, and I think you could potentially use the whole codex in writing your novel at some, level.
Yeah, and that's I think one of the benefits is that it can do that. It's not just randomly pulling things or making stuff up when you don't want it to. I mean, there's times where you want it to be creative, but there's other times where it should know who your character is. It should know, like you said, your writing style. Otherwise, you're rewriting it anyways. But why? But it's easier if it's starting from a point where that's close to what I would write, not some super formal. Like ChatGPT is often not very formal unless you tell it, write in a different style, but it's often a very formal language. It's not something that I would use, because I often use it to help me write introductions to podcasts or to articles or whatever. I have it sometimes when I'm stuck. I'll say, okay, here's the article here, or here's my notes from the podcast. Give me an idea for the intro, and it will, and then I'll rewrite. It's often not at all what I want, but then I rewrite it, and sometimes I'll pass that back in. I'll say, okay, what do you think of this? And it'll give me more improvements, but it often changes the language back to super formal, whatever. But there's often little pieces and bits that I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. I should talk about that. I should mention that. I should focus on that. So the back and forth, the iterative process really is helpful, but it doesn't always remember sort of the context. Like I'd have to say, okay, read these intros I've done in the past to get an idea of the intro I want to do now, and then it'd be a little closer to what I want. But it sounds like that's sort of built right into Novelcrafter, which is much easier. Yeah. So are you using it? So you mentioned like there's no chatting ability, yet you also said that you can use it for brainstorming. So how would you use it for brainstorming then, if there isn't sort of that window where you can just be like, hey, give me an idea for what happens here or whatever?
Sudowrite does not have a chat feature as of now. Novelcrafter does have a chat feature, so you can move out of your drafting mode into the chat mode, and you can do that inside of Novelcrafter. But what I do is I have a different tool that I use called lex.page, which is another paid subscription, sort of like a Google, Docs type of interface, where I can access multiple different AI models through it. So I have several different windows open while I'm drafting usually, and I will be working in Scrivener, which is my main document for drafting. I will be working with Novelcrafter for ideas and to keep the flow going, and I will have this other tool open where I can chat with, and it functions very much like Claude or ChatGPT, where it'll have a window and you can ask questions, and it will keep track of certain conversations. So I have sort of a three-pronged, three windows open while I'm drafting.
I mean, that means you're definitely a writer then. The more windows, the more windows you have open at any one time, the more of a writer you are. That's
right.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will have that open, multiple windows open just for the research purpose of it, right? But I imagine you can even use it to help with that. Although you want to sort of fact check it, since we all know that hallucinating that all these generative AIs tend to do and make stuff up, right? But it can probably help you do some of the preliminary research, and then you could then dive deeper in through regular, more traditional research.
Absolutely. And going down the research rabbit hole is something that writers love to do. So yes, I have multiple windows open for research too. But if you really want to have fun, you can ask the GPT or a chat bot to give you, the facts of, how would in a virtual room, for example, what are 3 ways that a person could be communicating outside of that room? And I could ask Google that, and they would come up with something. I could ask ChatGPT, and they'd come up with something else. And like you said, ChatGPT might be hallucinating it, but that might be the best answer for my particular world. And the quote unquote real answer might give me some inspiration as well. But sometimes we want it to hallucinate, because as fiction authors, we do want that generative component.
Oh, for sure. No, I'm more thinking about, like, say you were writing a historical novel and you need some facts about the way that the world worked and 1840 or whatever, and you asked it those questions, and then it gave you the answers, you probably still want to fact check those.
Never trust the GPT answers.
Yeah, which is, like you said, it's great for fiction, right? You want it to make stuff up, but for research, maybe not so much. So, I guess there's still authors out there that are sort of worried about this, and they're not just worried about it in terms of it taking their job, but with the idea that there's various lawsuits out there, right, that are sort of pending against the AI, saying it's stealing, it's taking, or it's learned from other artists, and then it's producing based on that, and they never gave explicit permission, this and that, and then so some people are worried that eventually it'll get shut down or something, which I don't think is ever going to happen. But they still have those fears that there'll be some kind of legal ramification, or they're worried that it'll just plagiarize, which you shouldn't really be worried about if you're rewriting it anyways. But you don't want it to necessarily grab ideas verbatim out of another book, and then you'd be like, hey, that's a great idea, and put it in yours, right? So what are your thoughts around all that?
I have a lot of thoughts. And first of all, I think it's really important for us as authors, as creators, as publishers, to be talking about these issues. So thank you for bringing this to your listeners. And there are important questions that we need to answer collectively about intellectual property and how we are going to be compensating authors and creators for the use of their copyrighted work in training these large language models. And that's an open question that needs to be addressed. I think there are also important questions that we need to ask about the guardrails around AI and how, as a society, what we're going to tolerate in terms of what were the lines that we don't want to have crossed. And those are important conversations to have as well. And one very important concept that I've been working with myself and with the authors that I speak with is that it's very easy to get into a mindset of, oh, things are terrible. Oh, lots of stuff is happening out there. And we're just these victims of these faceless tech companies that are creating these, crazy AI things that are going to take over the world and take everyone's jobs. And I identify with that, and I understand that fear. But I think we have to remember, and we know this as writers and as authors, that we are powerful creators, and we have the ability to create worlds and stories and narratives that draw people into an emotional experience that can transform them, whether it's entertainment or changing their minds or behaviors about something. And what we forget is that we are powerful creators in our own lives as well. And this has been proven again and again in science and neuroscience and quantum physics, that what we choose to focus on and what we choose to pay attention to and what we expect will happen. And that we're in the process every minute of every day of creating our reality and creating what we know is true. And I think as creators, as humans, we are being asked in this very transitional, very important transition in history to really look at our fear about what is going to be happening and to be asking questions about, is that really true? I'm afraid that AI is going to take over the world and kill creativity. Is that really true? And what is important about, why I'm thinking that? I would remind us all that we are powerful creators in our own right. And unless we give the power to AI to take away our jobs and our creators, we will find ways to work with it, to evolve with it, to push back against it, and to become the next version of what we're meant to be.
I mean, I think that's the thing that's getting to me. It's like these days you get bombarded with AI every single day. You're on Facebook at the moment, and I'm seeing it's one of the Mark Dawson's ads for authors courses open. So all of these authors are trying it out, and they're all publishing adverts that have AI generated art. And it's like, at the moment, you can tell at an instant you see AI art. And it's almost like, it is quite scary, because you're like, how much of human creativity is just being replaced by whatever gets churned out from prompts?
We are creators. And I think as long as we're alive on this planet, we are creative beings and we will find ways to create. And one thing that I do think about, which is trying to create my own reality around this, is all the exciting new forms of storytelling that are on the horizon for us and that we can't even conceive of right now. I mean, if you think about the evolution of storytelling for millennia, it never included a novel or a printed word. And I think we're looking at the next evolution of storytelling. And just looking ahead, I mean, we're even starting to see this already in how authors are creating beautiful physical products. For example, on a Kickstarter campaign, a beautiful physical book that AI would never be able to create. And looking ahead, I'm looking into multimedia type immersive experiences of experiencing fiction and story. And, right now some authors will put a playlist in the beginning of their book so readers can put the playlist on while they're reading. And I'm just seeing an evolution of that to, an infinite degree. One thing that I would love to do with my series is there is an AI character in my book, and the characters in my book interact with this AI for guidance. And what I would love to do is to create that character in real life so that readers could interact with that AI and ask it questions and see how it would respond. So, I mean, we're just looking at this as creators. We can look ahead with such fascination and joy about what is coming for us that we get to work with, that we get to create with AI or without AI. We can be artisanal storytellers. We can create events where we're sitting around a campfire and telling stories. There's just an endless number of possibilities that bring me a lot of hope and excitement.
Absolutely, and I think that is the important thing for authors to take away is that, sure, there's uncertainty, there's fear, there's all these things, but you don't. I think the risk of being left behind outweighs the uncertainty of what might happen in the future. And I think when you're at a stage like we are now, where AI is so new and so fresh, there's way more benefit to getting in now as opposed to waiting and seeing how it all sort of plays out. Because all the people that aren't waiting are the ones that are going to get in on it early and going to reap the benefits. We've seen that in many different times in the past, but even in writing, like if we look back to when Roland and I started writing back in 2013 or whatever, it was, or I mean, maybe he was writing before that. That's around when I got started. But
that was same with me.
Yeah, so the KDP thing was just sort of getting started around that, and it was sort of like a gold rush. It was a time where there wasn't a lot of people in it, and you can make a lot of money by writing and doing these things that other people just hadn't really discovered yet. And we reaped the benefits of that. It got harder as time went on, and everybody was doing it, and there's tons more competition in that. But I think that's where we are with AI now too, right? The writers that jump in now and figure out things like you mentioned that they are going to be able to capitalize on before everyone else, they're going to do really well. And if you wait until everyone else is doing it, then you're just kind of you're not really going to get that benefit the way you can now. And let your creativity come up with ideas. I think that what you talked about, that creating an AI character based on the character in your novel is an absolutely fabulous idea. It's definitely one you should pursue, and it is something you can do. I've seen programs and services out there that let you create that. I mean, they're used for sort of like role playing, where you can create a character that you want to interact with for various reasons, but you can create one, I think, for that reason as well. So that's a great idea.
Thank you. I hope I get to do that. And I think what you're saying is true. I think a lot of people do feel this fear of what's coming, but also a fear of missing out. And I would say to that, there is no timeline and there is no right way to move forward in your own author career with AI. And I'm also not saying, oh, just start working with AI and it'll be fantastic. I think people do have, and I think you should look for yourself at your own feelings about working with this kind of technology, and have a conversation with trusted friend and do some meditating or journaling about it if you're feeling some real feelings about it. And um, I don't think that everyone has to be working with AI or you're going to fail. I don't think we're at that point, but I do think there is, if you have curiosity about these tools, if you're open to learning and playing with these tools, there's no downside, and there's really just the possibility of discovering more about yourself as a creator. And maybe you'll ultimately decide that these tools aren't for you, or you'll wait for the next version of them, or you'll just use a little bit of this piece of this one occasionally. And that's okay too. Know yourself, know your strengths, and know what is going to support you as an author and as a creator.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that you have to use AI, but I think that if you're interested in it and you get in now, it's better than getting in later when everyone else has, right? And I think everyone should, at least, like you said, they should at least give it a chance to then be able to say, okay, I tried it, wasn't for me, but at least now I know, right? And you're not always sort of wondering, maybe it is for you, right? So I don't know. I think that's one of the things that I always am trying to sort of get across to my author community is just, don't bury your head in the sand about AI because you're worried about it. Just take a look, see what's out there. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. There might be something there that really helps you, that really speaks to you, that really moves your workflow along faster, makes you more successful in some small way. And if not, then at least you know.
And AI is not a monolith. There's so many different tools that are out there, so many more that are being invented every single day. It's very easy to get started with something and sort of get frustrated and leave it. But if you're interested and you're wanting to start with ChatGPT, for example, or a program like Claude, play around with it for a little bit long. Give yourself a little bit more of an on-ramp. Maybe watch some videos about how to prompt, and how other people are working with these tools, and just give yourself a little bit of time and space to feel out what might be interesting and supportive to you, because these tools may not be intuitive to all of us right away. So just give yourself, be patient with yourself as you're trying out some of these tools. You can also, and somebody mentioned this, you can also ask these chat tools how to best prompt them. Here's what I want. You can say, here's what I want to do. What would be the best prompt for you to get this result?
Yeah, I love that idea of saying, what question should I ask you that will give me the response I want? It's kind of like, if I have to explain the question, it should be able to get it anyways. But yeah, I get it. And that's a hard one to wrap your head around sometimes. But I know that people are using AI to sort of generate the right prompts to further their AI. This weird loop, causality loop. But yeah, I think, as you said, giving things a try is key, because especially if you're going to start with something like ChatGPT, there's completely free versions out there, right? Like ChatGPT, you don't have to pay. You can have access to version 3.5 for free. You just sign up and away you go. You don't need the latest version 4, but if you decide that that's for you, that's $20 a month, right? But that would at least, the free version will at least give you an idea of what it can do, and then you can move on. If that speaks to you, then you move on to things that might cost money, like Novelcrafter or Sudowrite or Claude. Well, Claude I think has a free version as well, but there's a lot of other tools out there that are really specific to writing, whereas ChatGPT is very generic. People are using it for all sorts of things, not just writing. I use it all the time. But for writing specific, if this is something that you're comfortable with, once you've used it, then you can look at those other things and then dive into them. Like you said, there's YouTube videos on everything. So you don't have to even necessarily go in and pay the money right up front. You can watch a few videos, see what people are doing with it, and then get an idea, is that really for me? And then, pay for 1 month at least, and then give it a try. It's a pretty low cost thing to that might have tremendous benefit for you, that it's worth sort of giving a try.
So where would anyone start giving it a try? Let's say you're an author who's heard this, and they're kind of interested. What are the step-by-steps? Which website should you start off on? How do you start going about it? Like, where should they play?
I would recommend going to chat.openai.com. That is the start page for signing up for a free account with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And you can use the free version right there. So you'll see a search bar, and you can start chatting with it just like you would a human. And there's also an app. I believe it's available for iPhone. I don't know if it's available for Android. You can also download the ChatGPT app and use that the same way on your phone or a mobile device. And in terms of
yeah, go ahead.
Starting to, I'm just trying to think of what would I ask ChatGPT about, fiction writing and about getting started. I think just start where you are. And if you have a work in progress, ask about a character and what character traits, or ask about a setting, or ask to describe a scene, or a piece of lore or a magical item, and just start talking with it like you would an intern who's working with you in your novel, empire.
Yeah, I mean, you can ask it questions about your book. You can even sort of put in a few chapters or a few paragraphs of your story, that maybe a completed work, right? And then say continue, and then see what it comes up with. I mean, it's probably not going to come up with what you had. I mean, it's not going to come up obviously with exactly what you had. It might go in a completely different direction. It doesn't have the context of the rest of the book and everything, but you'll have an idea of, what is this thing really going to do with what I've just pasted in, and that'll show you it's not necessarily just some random thoughts. Like, it's actually continuing on, and it'll probably write it in sort of the same sort of style as that part that you pasted in, and it'll sort of really open your eyes to what this thing can do. I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, you can also cut and paste a sample of your writing, and you can ask it to analyze your writing. You can ask it for suggestions, for feedback, and you can also ask it to describe the style of your writing, so that you can then use that in another prompt. Please write this paragraph in the style that you said my writing was in. Write this dialogue between this character and this character, and make it 200 words. And so you can build on how you're prompting it in the context window.
Yeah, and you can even upload. I mean, well, I think it might not be in the free version, but definitely on the paid version, you can upload like a full novel that you've written and have it, analyze it, tell you things about it, proofread it, do all sorts of things. And I think with the free version, you have less of a context. I think it's probably, I don't even know if you can upload files, but you can only paste in a certain amount of characters or whatever. But yeah, like, as you get more comfortable with it, you can try more and more advanced things. And it really is endless. It's really, what your imagination can. You can even ask these things, what can I do to use you as a writing assistant? And it'll give you a whole bunch of ideas.
Absolutely. You can tell it how to act as my book coach, and tell me what the most exciting next thing is going to be in this, chapter that I'm writing. Act as my book marketer and tell me what tropes I need to include in this, chapter to make sure that it's appealing to my readers. Give me a profile of my ideal reader. I'm writing this novel. So yes, the possibilities are endless, and it's really, you're only limited by your imagination. And this is where I find it helps to be in conversation with other writers who are working with AI in this way, so that we can get ideas from each other and inspire each other with how we can work with these tools.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great point too. Is like you can say to it, what's my ideal reader? Or if you already have an ideal reader in mind, you can even say, is this appropriate for this kind of a reader? Or have it act as almost like a sensitivity reader and say like, okay, is there any issues that a person of this background would have with what I've written? And I'm not saying again that you would supplant using a true sensitivity reader, but it will at least give you some ideas about whether you even need to be concerned about it. So there's so many ways that authors could be using AI to help them that it's really something that they shouldn't ignore completely.
I agree. And again, just coming back to this question is, we are still writers. We're writers who are working with AI. We're using our own brains, our own creativity, our own ideas, the things that we're dreaming and feeling and creating. And we're using AI to enhance that process and to increase the amount of connections and sparks and ideas that we can pull into that process. So this does not replace us as writers. This enhances us as humans.
And I think we're approaching the top of the hour, but I think that's kind of a good place to wrap up, because I will notice, I mean, I'm seem skeptical and dubious of AI, but there are areas in which I use it practically every day. I mean, when we are trying to brainstorm titles for our podcasts, I used to be a commercial copywriter, and I would spend hours trying to come up with a headline, and it was ridiculous. And then you can plug in ChatGPT and it'll come up with 20 of them, and maybe you take 3 or 4 and mash them together and maybe noodle a word. But I mean, it is just such a time saver, and it's here right now. It ain't going nowhere.
No.
So Jennifer, we are about to wrap up. Before we do, and before we give everyone a chance to find your work and stuff like that, Craig, do you have any final questions?
No, I'm just, like I said, this is one of my favorite topics, so I can talk about this for hours. But I'm really grateful that you came on, Jen, because I think you have some really good insight into some of these tools that I haven't even used yet. Sudowrite, and I hadn't even heard of Novelcrafter. So that's a really interesting one that I'm going to look at. But hopefully, anyone listening is, regardless of where they are in their stage of AI use, whether they haven't used it or they've started to, I think that there's some really good information here for them to take on and move forward with. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for talking about this. I think it's really important for us to be discussing.
Now, talking about discussing things and talking about you, where can people find out more about Jennifer?
I'm at jenniferlewy.com. That's Lewy, where you can find my fiction and subscribe to my free newsletter where I talk about my writing process and interesting books I'm reading and thoughts about the future. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook as Jennifer Lewy Author.
Fantastic. Well, we will pop a link down below to that website. So if you want to, you can scroll down and check it out. While you're down there, why don't you go to the comment section and leave Jennifer a nice comment explaining how much you appreciated and valued what she shared with us today, because I know Craig and I did. And while you're there, you could also hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and that like button and that bell notification so you get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. Jennifer, thank you very much for joining us, and everyone else will be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. Until then, cheerio.